Hi again, everybody. We're almost there. So please, we know it's been a long wait, but give us just a few more minutes and we'll be able to start. Maria, please speak.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, finally.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Good afternoon again, fellow members of the public service. Thank you for your patience and thank you for joining us at this virtual town hall at short notice. We're gathered here at the Transformation Implementation Unit, and we have Deputy Financial Secretary in the Ministry of Finance and Public Service, Mr. Wayne Jones, Head of the Transformation Implementation Unit, Maria Thompson Walters, who will come on screen shortly and who you saw earlier. And we also have President of the Jamaica Civil Service Association, Mr. O'Neill Grant, and President of the Confederation of Trade Unions, Mrs. Helene Davis White. We agreed to issue the invitation for this virtual town hall in the wake of concerns that arose over the weekend, well, on Sunday, in fact, in response to circular number 24 that went out. And we want to have an opportunity to dialogue with you on that to answer any questions that you might have and to address any areas of concerns that you may have. Maybe I could probably begin with a few opening remarks. Mary, what do you think? Davis, can you? So, first of all, ladies and gentlemen,
Recording in progress.
something I just want to share with everyone. After we reached agreement with with about 19 unions so far, the Ministry of Finance and Public Service has been making every effort to put ourselves in a position where members of the public service who are part of bargaining units who have signed up to a certain point can receive payments of their of the arrears that arise out of the agreement, as well as the payment for December, with the agreement effective on the 1st of April. That was always going to be an uphill task, just because the time has been short. Members of the Ministry of Finance and Public Service and the Transformation and Implementation team would have been working day and night over the past 10 days or so to put ourselves in a position that all members of the public service, or certainly all civil servants, are in receipt of these payments. Now, in order for those payments to be made, the Ministry of Finance and Public Service has to be in receipt of calculations from ministries, departments, and agencies that it then turns over to the Accountant General for the payments to be processed. It was in that context that that circular arose, and I want you to understand, just to bring you into confidence, how these things work for those of you who may not be aware. And that's an operational matter that is a part of how we go from policy, where I have responsibility, into implementation of policy on an operational basis. The Ministry of Finance needed to send instructions to MDAs as to how to compute what needs to be paid. And I want to make those of you who are, have dabbled with computers, will have an understanding of how you program a computer or you put an algorithm in place. The instructions that would have gone out were algorithmic instructions about how to construct a payment. And I do understand that that algorithm, especially due to the fact that it has entries that are preceded by the word minus this, and then minus that, and then minus this, has given the impression of a quote unquote, recovery of items or of lines that people thought ought not to be quote unquote recovered. Now, I just want the opportunity of a few minutes to just explain things, and I hope that you will give me that time. In any exercise where compensation is being changed with an effective date in the past, and where amounts have to be calculated that are owing from that effective date. One, if you were to ask, what algorithm would you put in place for a computer to calculate the amount? You would, by necessity, take the new amount under the new compensation scheme, and you would subtract the old amount under the old compensation scheme. And you would come up with a net difference that is then owing and what we commonly call back pay. To put some numbers behind this year for the 12 months, the amount for public sector salaries was approximately, prior to the increase, meaning the old compensation, was approximately 240 billion, let's say, plus or minus 10 or 15 billion. So for 12 months, 240 billion is due. So over 9 months, we would have paid 3/4 of that amount, which is about 180 billion. And for sake of argument, let us say that the new compensation system for that 9 months would pay 210 billion instead of 180 billion. I think it's clear to everyone who is on this call that having paid 180 billion is not, we certainly couldn't take up 240 billion and pay that on top of the 180. Clearly, that's not the case. What we would have to do is to take into consideration that 180 billion has already been paid, but under the new compensation system, 240 billion is due, and therefore we make $30 billion in additional payments to persons so that their compensation for the 9 months reflects the new compensation system. And in essence, that is what the instructions speak to. An algorithm so that the amounts received, when you add them all up, what has already been received and what is to be received, and when you add them up, they represent what one ought to receive if the new compensation system is implemented as at the 1st of April 2022. Now, just to get a little more granular, and I hope I can retain your attention even at a level of additional granularity. The algorithm that went out would have specified, add this, add that, add this, and then minus this, minus this, minus this. And again, the reaction to that, the psychological and emotional reaction to that has been the minuses represent recovery. But I just want to just share something with you that I hope that you can appreciate, that you will appreciate. When you have a non-tax allowance for the statutories that are due to be calculated, once you establish the gross pay, you by definition have to deduct the non-tax allowance and then apply the rates that apply to statutory deduction. You then apply NIS and NHT and HART and EdTax. So if you were to write those instructions to be in an algorithmic way for a computer to understand, or for somebody computing to understand, you would say, add the non-tax allowance to your basic pay, you get your gross pay, for example. Then you have to take off the non-tax allowance and so minus the non-tax allowance. And when you have done that, you apply the rates of NIS, NHT, EdTax, and HART, and then you get the correct amounts that should show up on a payslip. So that algorithm, which is an algorithm that we use on a monthly basis, would contain add this, and then it would have minus this, and then apply the statutory. So the same logic that is being applied today to this algorithm that went out on Sunday were applied to the algorithms that are used every single month under the existing compensation system to calculate net pay and to calculate the right amount of statutory, you would conclude under the same logic that we are quote unquote recovering every month. My colleagues in the public sector, the simple truth is that this is an arithmetic necessity so that when the pay slip is received, the amount of the statutory reflect the actual amount of statutory that need to be paid in the context of the new compensation system. And there's no other algorithm that would show up those correct statutory. And I think you will understand what I said previously, that by definition, to calculate the amounts that are due, one has to subtract what has already been paid. Now, people say, but you said, Minister, that there'll be no recovery. I indeed issued a statement, and in response to questions in Parliament, I outlined what recovery meant from my point of view. Under the compensation restructuring with the new compensation system, we will have aberration where when we do the calculation, it would appear as if people owe the government money. I'll give you a simple example. If someone is acting in a post that is senior to his substantive post, that person, and getting seniority and other additional payments, that person on conversion is likely to end up in a situation that would imply that that person owes the government money. And under normal circumstances, that would mean the person has to take money out of their pockets and pay the government. Now, when I said, and I say that there's no recovery, what I mean is that no one will have to repay the government. No one will have to go into their pockets and on a net basis transfer resources to the government. And I stand by that. We will ensure that in situations like that, because of the guaranteed minimum that exists, temporary allowances will be put into the calculation. And if you look at the algorithm closely, you will see room for those temporary allowances. And that will turn what was a negative into positive. But my colleagues in the public sector, the statement no recovery does not and cannot mean that we ignore what has been paid in order to calculate what is due. You just have to do the mental arithmetic to see that on a national scale, that would not be feasible. In the extreme, I've given the example that we have paid about $180 billion for the 9 months under the old system. We would have paid $180 billion for the 9 months between April 1st and December 31st. There is no way, having paid $180 billion, we can simply forget that we're paid $180 billion and fork out $240 billion out of thin air under the new compensation system. That's just utterly unworkable. It's unworkable on that scale, and it's unworkable on even smaller scales when you go and target a specific allowance here or a specific allowance there. And it's out of keeping with the principle that we are embarked upon. And what is the principle? The principle is that when one receives the arrears in December, if one were to add up all that one has received from the government between April and December of this year, inclusive of the payments in April, May, June, July, August, September, October, and November, and inclusive of the arrears in December, it should equal exactly what one would have earned if the new compensation system were implemented on the 1st of April of this year. That is the exercise. And I do understand that under the circumstances, a circular that went out without opportunity for it to be contextualized, without opportunity for payroll officers to be brought into a conversation like the one that we're having today, where it's properly explained, the room for negative interpretation of that circular was large. But I would ask for your understanding that that only arose out of the desire and the intention and the action of doing and working overtime, working through the evening and into the night, to ensure that members of the civil service receive payments in December. Indeed, the financial secretary under whose signature that went out is not here today, but she's down with fever, having worked all through Saturday and Sunday to facilitate the payment to civil servants of these amounts on time. So as I said, you know, I just want to, the final thing I'll share before I sort of open it up is to say, you know, in a proverbial word, had we sort of been at this point, you know, a month ago, it would have allowed for greater ventilation around the context of Circular 24 before it went out. There'd have been we'd have had the opportunity for some kind of orientation session where people are brought up to speed on what it means. People would have had opportunity to ask questions. We'd have had examples printed. We'd have had examples on the screen, and it would have been done in that way. Unfortunately, the time that we got to agreement was in November, the middle of November, and with all the steps that are required to put the accountant general in a position to make payments, it meant that these instructions had to go out from the Ministry of Finance, and it did not provide an opportunity for the kind of ventilation that we'd have wanted. But I ask for you to see that for what it is, not as you know, an attitude of callousness or an attitude of that's uncaring, but simply the exigencies of trying to get put the ministries and the Ministry of Finance in a position that you can receive your payments in December. I'm going to make an appeal, you know, that sometimes in situations like this, when we're doing a restructuring and the restructuring affects people in different ways, different people come away with different amounts, there can be, you know, it's human nature to look on what somebody else, you know, walks away with. And in that context, what would ordinarily, in usual circumstances, what would be a large payment suddenly looks like a payment that's not large relative to someone else. And I would just ask that we reflect on the time that we're in, a time of global uncertainty, where we have economies that are poised to go into recession, the United States and Europe, where we've had public sector salaries frozen since 2018 in countries like Barbados. We've had them reversed by 10% in Belize. We've had in Antigua and St. Lucia, government on a record unable to pay the public service. And here we are at the same time implementing what is a historic transformational compensation that stands to benefit the vast majority, if not all, of public sector employees. And that context is important. It's easy when tempers flared, where there's a feeling and things have gone out and there's appearance and there has been conversation, for us to lose perspective on the bigger picture. This arrangement, this compensation restructuring, puts the public sector in a position, in a better position. Nothing is perfect, but a better position to attract and retain. And this transitional arrangement, where we're going from the old to the new, introduces a few, you know, hurdles like what we are experiencing over the past 24 hours. And I hope that in it, we can work together. You know, we've been in meetings with the Civil Service Association and with the Confederation of Trade Unions through its president and other members for much of the day. And we will continue to work together to ensure that the interests of members are adequately addressed. And I ask you to see the spirit with which we are engaging with you today on very quick notice, making ourselves available for questions by you and for the opportunity to speak to you, for you to see in that a spirit that is geared towards making public sector compensation in Jamaica improved, more efficient for you and for others in the public service. Thank you. With that, I'll close and make myself available to answer any questions that you may have later. Now, this is unscripted town hall. We didn't start with an agenda. It's really playing it by ear. I don't know if others want to make any statements at this point, or if we should move directly to questions that members make. Given the hour and given your patience in waiting, we'll just move straight to questions. I ask you to forgive the background. We don't have any fancy background. We're just in a conference room here at the Transformation Implementation Unit. So I ask you to just forgive that. This is we're not into presentation here. We're into just discussing substance in a quick way, in an efficient way, in a responsive way to respond to the concerns that have been raised. So maybe we open up the questions. I'm going to ask Aniki Clark, who is on the platform, to recognize persons who may have their hand up and to call on them to ask their question.
Thanks, Minister. Good evening, everyone. It's a webinar, so you will need to post your questions in the Q&A. So there's some questions there, Minister and team. So I'm going to start with the first one. Will registered midwives repay the allowances that were discontinued? All I need is a yes or no. You got that, Minister and team?
Hi, Anika, I didn't hear what you said a while ago.
Okay. The question is, will registered midwives repay the allowances that were discontinued?
Registered midwives.
Okay, the question is, will the registered midwives
have to repay the allowances that have been discontinued?
Okay, you see, okay, Aniki, I have a challenge with that language. And if you'd allow me to address it, there's nobody who is repaying allowances that have been discontinued. We are aiming to implement the new system as of April 1st. We could have collectively, with the agreement of everybody, made a different decision. We could have made the decision collectively to implement it as of January 1st. In which case, there'd be no back pay and we would just go forward with the new system. But instead, for everybody's benefit, we have said, no, let's go back to April 1st so that people can get at the benefit of a longer period of the new compensation system. As a result of that, we have to take into consideration what has been paid already. Taking into consideration what's been paid already is not the same thing as repaying. It's only making sure that the taxpayer gets a fair deal. The taxpayer is signing up to pay you a payment as of April 1st, which is your new compensation system. That's what the taxpayer is signing up to do. Now, if you have already received a certain amount, the taxpayer can't say, all right, can't ignore what you've received. The taxpayer just wants to pay you the additional amount that brings you up to the new compensation level. that's not the same thing as saying you're repaid what you received. You know, it's a, if I may, if you'll permit me to be honest, it's an erroneous framing of what is happening.
Thanks, Minister.
There's nobody who is repaying allowances.
Okay. Thanks for that, Minister. Another question has to do with for departments or agencies that have not yet signed off on the compensation package with the Ministry of Finance. Does this mean allowances to be discontinued with the new compensation package will be continued to be paid for these public bodies until they officially come to an agreement with the Ministry of Finance? So in cases where public bodies have not yet.
Let me just answer that upfront, right? We have an all compensation system and we're contractually obligated to that. Until it changes to a new compensation system, the old system continues. So for those, whatever, the old system continues. However, I would just remind you that the old system pays less on a net basis than the new system. So it's not in anybody's interest, really, to continue on the old system. And as I've said publicly before, we're going to need to transition to the new system for everybody before the end of long before the end of the fiscal year, or else the amounts that would be due and owing from April 1st could not be paid for another couple of years because we are not able to carry those back payments. They're very heavy. We have made provisions for them this year. We will not have the space fiscally to carry those back payments into next year.
Okay, and the question of contract employment has resurfaced in this town hall, Minister. The question is, there are persons who are on contract. They are not aligned to a pay scale. Their posts are established within the GOJ, but not at their specified place of employment. These persons are being told that they will not benefit from the compensation review. If this is the case, what will be done for these contracted workers?
Okay, so what I'd like to communicate with my fellow members of the public sector, that we are taking on very difficult problems. We're taking on problems that some people describe as intractable, problems that built up over many, many, many decades, many, many layers. And even these challenges that we're having is a demonstration of the complex and intractable nature of public sector compensation. That should give everyone the confidence that we are not going to shy away from any difficult kind of reform. Now, another problem that exists in the public sector, in the public sector compensation arrangements, which is a different problem altogether from, complicated, inefficient compensation systems, is that our compensation and hiring arrangements have had an undue reliance on contract employment. And that undue reliance has come about for a number of reasons, which are beyond the scope of this call, but we'll have an opportunity in the future to engage on, and have built up over many, 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 many decades. And we have tens of thousands of persons who are affected by it. And I give you my word that contract employment in the public sector is going to be something that we address. It's not something that we, as a general structural challenge, structural problem, is not something that we can address at the same time as we're doing this compensation reform. It's a separate problem that needs its own time and attention. But given how we have taken on this huge problem of public sector compensation, it should give you the confidence that when we say we're going to deal with contract employment in the public sector and structure it appropriately so that everybody is better off, that when we say we're going to do it, we are going to do it. But what we are not in a position to do is to make those very overdue reforms right now at the same time as we're reforming compensation system for the permanent establishment. So, we have to do things in phases, but as soon as this implementation is on its way, and we don't have to be kind of engaged and talk, on it. I want to spend as much time on this compensation reform. My attention will immediately turn to the reform of contract employment in the public sector. And I give you that assurance. Okay? And that's something that we're going to engage in the same way. We'll have town hall sessions on it. It's a big problem. I don't want to trivialize. I don't want you to think it's a huge, huge problem. There are tens of thousands of persons in that group. And because it has built up, what has been built up over 30 years, ladies and gentlemen, is not something I can just solve in a second. But you invest your confidence in us as a team, we will address it, and we will come up with solutions that we can share with you.
Thanks, Minister. Following on, there is a question around discontinued allowances. Have these been factored into the net pay for the 20% increase? Have discontinued allowances been factored? Have discontinued allowances been factored into the net pay for 20% increase?
Right. So again, what we're doing is we are revamping compensation entirely. We have a whole compensation system that we are disbanding, and it goes away altogether, and we're replacing it with a new compensation system. Right? The old compensation system had different structures, had all these allowances, etc., etc. The new compensation system doesn't have many of those. As such, when we talk about will the discontinued allowance feature in the 20% minimum, what we're saying there is that when we look at the new system and we compare with the old, everybody ought to be better off over those 3 years by a minimum of 20%. Okay, so if when you do the calculation, the new looks like this compared to the old, we'll artificially raise the new to make sure it is 20% higher than the old over that period. If it looks like you do the calculation and the old is bigger than the new, we will artificially, using temporary allowances, raise the new to make sure that it's 20% greater than the old. And that is the assurance and the guarantee that we provide to you.
Thanks, Minister. How will overtime be treated under the new compensation system? Payment for overtime.
Well, when we're talking to civil servants here, that's what this forum is geared towards, and there's no there's some, yeah. So I mean, where overtime applies mostly to weekly pay, I guess. Those are governed by the laws of the country, and the laws of the country will continue to apply. They'll just apply to a new compensation level.
Thank you, Minister. For persons that are acting in a higher capacity and receiving upkeep allowance, how will we be assured that the temporary allowance will be enough to offset the recovery? I'm an accounting technician working in a higher capacity, and based on what I'm seeing on my payslip, my old compensation, inclusive of the acting, is way more than the new compensation.
Right. So this is someone who is in an active position?
Yes, sir.
Yes, that is definitely going to be the case for somebody in an active position. And it's not hard to see why. The person is being converted at their substantive position, but they're acting up here. But this position in the old system relates to this position in the new, right? But it is less than the acting position. What we have, that's a classic example, and which I concur with. what we are saying to you as well is that where you have a situation where the old is like this and the new is like this, we will make an allowance to ensure that the new has a relationship with the old that is 20% higher over the implementation period. Okay, and that's an assurance that we provide. And so if there's some aberration that doesn't meet that, you can bring it to our attention. But that's a policy intent to ensure that the minimum on a net basis over the 3-year period is 20%.
Thanks, Minister. And someone is asking, how will that 20% be paid? Whereas for the 17.5, it was 7.5, 5 and 5. How will the 20% be paid?
Well, we just arrived at the 20% agreement today. We have to move some things around in terms of expenditure and so on, because it's going to cost us more. So I don't know if we have totally finalized how, but what we're looking at is, I think, instead of 7.5, 5, and then 5, instead of that, we're looking at 10, 5, 5. But because the payment instructions have to go in day after tomorrow, it is not necessarily clear that the change from 7.5 to 10 can be reflected in a day and a half. Okay. However, you have the assurance that it will be reflected in this financial year.
Okay.
Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense to everybody. Yeah.
Yes. Will the threshold
and remember that the reason for that, ladies and gentlemen, you will remember that in December, payday is earlier than normal. Payday is on the 20th. It's normally on the 26th, I believe, 25th. So that 5 days, that means that the instructions have to be in much sooner, and we're already, tomorrow is the 13th of December. It wouldn't be possible to make that kind of change to have an effect in 7 days across the civil service, from Portland to Niguel Point. So it may have to come, in the January payment or thereabouts. But what we're working towards that in this fiscal year is 10, next fiscal year 5, other fiscal year 5.
Thank you very much. And will the threshold be increased? You've been asked that question a number of times. I think this
I thought that we would not be able to escape that question. It is certainly a desire at some point to do that. An increase in the threshold, as you know, means lower revenues for government. And there are 400,000 people who are on PAYE, of which about, under the old system, about 100,000, are above the threshold. We have to see what our revenues look like and what our expenditures look like. We have demands for garbage trucks and buses and roads and bridges and drugs for hospitals and, so we have to be able to supply those to Jamaican people. So I would just say that something I'd love to do, but as your responsible finance minister, I could not give any definitive response to that without doing lots of calculations before.
Okay, wading through the questions. Thanks, Minister. A lot of them have to do with allowances that will be discontinued. Acting again.
Just a general, for anybody who has a question on allowances to be discontinued, right? Regardless of what that particular allowance is. Remember, as I said to you earlier, that we're comparing the new system with the old system, and we're guaranteeing that on a net basis, there'll be a minimum level of increase over 3 years of 20%. 10 in the first year, 5 in the second, 5 in the third. And we are also sort of pointing out that it's a completely new arrangement. And the test of the arrangement is that the net pay is higher, and in many cases, a lot higher than the net pay of the previous arrangement.
Yes, I think that's clear, and that should cover most of those questions having to do with how allowances will be treated. There's a question here, Minister. How will the 10% lump sum payment, when will the 10% lump sum payment for the 2021 travel allowance be paid?
All right, let me just confirm that a little bit. That should be about January or February. So for some people, it's not only December to remember. It will be a little thing in January and February as well. Yeah.
Someone here wants to see how the calculations are being done. We've had payroll training. You want to expand on that, Minister, in terms of making sure that retroactive payments are accurate?
Right. So that was the purpose of laying out in great detail in an algorithmic format. And anybody who's done computer programming would know that if you look at the program that goes into the computer to perform some function, it don't really look like standard English, right? Because the way you instruct a machine, you have to be very detailed, one step at a time. And if you just take a casual look at it, it can appear to be different from what you thought when you read about it in English. The purpose of that circular is to put it out in great detail so that people don't make mistakes or errors. We have had the opportunity, I think, to engage with payroll officers. We had some training sessions on the new amounts. On how to calculate the new amounts. I think those training sessions were on conversion, how to convert to the right point. We had those training sessions right here at the Transformation Implementation Unit. So the payroll officers have gone through training, but at the Ministry of Finance, we have provided a backstop that we'll be able to, correct any errors that are made. And sometimes when you make, this is a monumental change, ladies and gentlemen. I think everybody will agree. We don't have any precedent for this. This has never before happened in Jamaica. President O'Neill will tell you that. President Helene will tell you that. Never happened before. But not because it has never happened before doesn't mean we can't do it. But it takes a lot of courage to do things that we've never done before. And it also takes this kind of, opportunity and forum. And, precisely because it has never happened before, we are ensuring that we provide a backstop to catch any errors that are made. So people don't have to wail and scream and get, and hyperventilate and get, very overly anxious and concerned. We stand by the policy commitments we've made. And those policy commitments will be implemented, even if somebody gets it wrong somewhere. And let's face it, errors are human. So it wouldn't surprise me that if across 60,000 people, there isn't an error here or there. That is human. But you have the assurance that we will respond forcefully to any errors that are discovered.
Moving along, Minister, how will our performance be evaluated, and what are the rewards or benefits for consistently hard work?
Excellent question. You're taking us into the future. This reform to the compensation system is the first part of a two-part process. And the first part is to move compensation from this I'm going to use the expression, I hope you'll forgive me, Jamaican expression, this chaka chaka system that currently exists into a new streamlined system that is common across the public sector. Now, once we do that, we're not finished. The next stage is to overlay on that compensation system a performance appraisal system that will allow persons to move up the scale, even outside of a promotion. Now, you'll agree, right, that it's for it to have the confidence of the Jamaican people, it has to be reformed from what we have today. And that is what we're going to be working with your representatives in the Jamaican Civil Service and in the Confederation of Trade Unions to achieve. We have set an ambitious timeline that by end of 23, 24, which is now 18 months away. All right, so that's around the corner. We've put ourselves on the hook to say that 18 months from now, we're giving ourselves 18 months to define a performance appraisal system that you can have confidence in and that the Jamaican people have confidence in. Don't forget the second part. And a system that's based on merit, not based on friends, and based on objective criteria that are aligned with the interests of the Jamaican people. And we are going to have special fora like this, where we have an opportunity, long before it's designed, long before it's complete, we have an opportunity to dialogue around the parameters for this performance evaluation system. So that when it's implemented, it's not a surprise to anyone. You're a part of the conversation, you know what is coming, and it can incentivize and motivate the kinds of behaviors, the kinds of values, and the kinds of outcomes that we want in the public service.
Thanks, Minister. A question around anomalies. How will real anomalies be dealt with? Will there be a review panel of sorts?
Okay, so some of the anomalies will be dealt with automatically in that we have a computer system, right, which is why I gave detailed instruction, kind of if then, and a tree, if that, then you go here, if you go here, and so on. And a part of that program says, if somebody ends up that it looks like they owe the government $200,000, then that is rejected and it is replaced immediately with a temporary allowance that guarantees that that person ends up with 10% in the first year. Okay, so it's not possible to do this manually. It will take too long. It's going to be done algorithmically so that it picks up those aberrations and makes adjustment beforehand. Now, it is possible that some will slip through, but we have given the assurance that we'll have a quality control that we can step in and respond to any aberration that makes its way through our automatic adjustment process.
Thanks, Minister. And moving on, someone is asking that when the compensation review was being introduced, from my understanding, it was to create a right across the board review for all government employees. Why are agencies, for example, separate from central government pay scale? Why wasn't it implemented for all of us under one package?
Okay, good question. So we're going to have a single fine for the civil service that applies to public bodies generally. There'll be some public bodies, and I want you to be completely transparent, that will be slightly outside of that system, and that will be the commercial public bodies, the public bodies that perform a commercial function. In our laws, like the Financial Audit and Administration Act, those public bodies are already treated differently. And around the world, public bodies that perform public commercial functions, certainly Canada, New Zealand, Australia, the UK, all the Commonwealth advanced economies, they have scale that differ from the central scale. And there are good reasons for that we can probably get into at another point. But the reason why we have what appears to be a 1 step and then a 1.5 step is that the way in which you reach agreement with the public bodies is slightly different, is less efficient than with central government. Central government, there's one union that represents 30,000 civil servants. In the public bodies, we have 140 different boards. And the way compensation is done in a public body is that it's management that proposes to the board, and then the board agrees, and then the compensation becomes effective. It wasn't possible to coordinate those 140 boards all at the same time. So what we've done is to agree the scale, and I want you to understand the significance of that. It's the same scale that all the public bodies will use, with the exception of the commercially oriented public bodies. And all that needs to happen is for the jobs in each public body to be mapped onto the new scale. Right, so the scale is already agreed. It's a question as to whether job X at public body A, whether that job X is level 3 or level 4, whether job Y is level 7 or level 8. And that's a process that will be far quicker than the process we've been engaged with the civil service and arriving at the scale to begin with. And so we don't see it. We believe that public bodies will be able to finalize very, very quickly. But again, the process of finalization is through the board. And the fragmentation of that made it more efficient to deal with the civil service first, because with one agreement, you cover 30,000 civil servants. And we're going to have to go agreement by agreement to deal with the 100 members of staff at this public body, the 50 members of staff at that public body, the 500 at this public body, and so on. So I hope it will be clear to people that it's for the sake of efficiency why we needed to approach it in this sequential way.
Thanks, Minister. Garnet is asking, what was the motivation for freezing performance increments for 3 years?
What was the motivation for?
Freezing performance
increments.
Okay.
Thank you for asking that. I give you 2 motivations. The first is that in moving to a new system, it would be extremely difficult to be moving increments at the same time and maintaining the integrity of the system. The second is that what we're saying is, at the time we implemented this, we only have 18 months to the new system of performance. It's only 18 months that we're talking about. In fact, it's not even 18 months. It's 15 months at this stage. It's 3 months left between January and March 23, and then 12 months between April 23 and March 24. That's 15 months that are left to the new system. So we say freezing increments. We're freezing it for 15 months. And what that is about is that we're saying that the existing performance system is broken. It with the greatest of respect, hope I'm not walking on any toes by saying that, but it's a system by and large that does not really, for the most part, there may be exceptions, it does not really make a lot of differentiation. And for a performance system to work, there has to be differentiation. We want a Jamaica where there's record, while there's recognition of unit performance, has to be recognition of individual performance. And individual performances are not all the same. We know that, right? So what we don't want to do is to undermine the integrity of the system by continuing with this performance element that we know is compromised. What we want to do is implement the new system that Jamaica has confidence in, that the taxpayer has confidence. We have 1.3 million taxpayers. Don't forget that, right? That are 1.3 million taxpayers In fact, we have more. That's just our employment base. We have 1.5 million adults in the country, but 1.5 million taxpayers in Jamaica. We have to maintain their confidence that this biggest item of expenditure, which is public sector compensation, we're doing it in a way that is in the public's interest. And it's not in the public's interest to know that something is broken and to continue to use it. So yeah, I know. We're as President O'Neill and President Aline are reminded me. Maybe I should have deferred from answering that question because it's a matter that we're still discussing.
Okay. I see a few persons, ministers, saying that they will be going home with less pay. Do you want to address that point? I think it's worth reiterating that no one would be worse.
You know, I would love somebody who is saying that to come live and let's have a conversation about that so we can dispel that fear. Okay, because we are saying to you a guarantee that you can take to the bank that we will not allow that to stand. Let us say it even happens. Let us say that you experience that. We're saying to you that where we find that we will correct it. There's a minimum guarantee on the net. And I want to share with you that when we normally talk about increases, we talk about increases on the gross. When we guarantee on the net, implied on the gross is higher. So if you're to compare it with prior dispensations, right? I think I've said enough. So those who fear that they will receive less, I assure you yet again that the policy guarantees that that is not how the fiscal year will end, right? If that even appears to be the case, it will be corrected. And I ask you to understand that in an ambitious reform, and a reform that is as ambitious as this, by definition, we will have aberrations that slip through the cracks. Once we find them, or once you make us aware of them, and we'll have the requisite customer hotlines that people can call, we will address it. And I was going to say this, that the nature of this reform, which benefits public sector employees, benefits the people of Jamaica, is such a huge reform that it, requires us to take this approach where if there, we know there may be a few aberrations here or there, we are backstopping it and will provide the necessary top-up to ensure that everybody has a positive experience, an experience where they're earning more.
Thanks, Minister. We're at the 9 o'clock mark, but I see a question here. What is the union saying about this new development? I know you're joined, Minister, by the JCTU and the JCSA. Do they have a position? Would they like to speak to what you've just said?
Sure, we could have.
I'm speaking for the good evening, everyone.
Hold on, you need to turn it. Oh no, that's the connection.
No, sir, it's a poor. It's been powerful. Very powerful.
The other way, Miriam.
Huh?
Are we still on?
Yeah.
Yes,
On the bottom.
we were going to be hearing from
Oh, no.
the grant.
All the way down. The tick at the bottom. You see the zoom icon at the bottom of the page. Yeah, man, right down at the bottom, all the way down.
Look on the screen, point it there.
Oh.
And then take out the power cable so it can be.
Oh, yeah.
It's not better. So you can focus on it.
Seeing you.
Good night, everyone.
Yes, that's fine.
All right, so as we have always maintained, the JCSA does recognize that with all that is happening, we have to continue the dialogue. The positions that were arrived at today is as a result of continued dialogue, and those doors have not been closed. We do recognize that this is in fact a difficult situation for all of us. We were very clear at the onset that there will be persons who will be benefiting more from the compensation than others. The intention of the union was always to see how we can lift the guaranteed minimum that those who will be benefiting less will enjoy. We do recognize that the impact of taxation is real, and particularly because a significant portion of the income that is now being absorbed into salaries as a result of a change in government policy is now giving the reality that a significant portion of your income is now subject to tax. And this is now being borne out when we are now doing the implementation. We will be continuing the dialogue. As we have indicated, there are some things that have come out in the circulars issued that we are in discussion with the Ministry of Finance to see how we can fix those. Persons have talked about the duty allowances as those items that are overtime related. There are other things that we would have indicated to our members that we have not closed the doors on those discussions. So even though the template has been developed and has been put out that has those in there, we have not closed those and say that those are a done deal. We will be continuing to have the discussions to resolve it, because as we have repeatedly indicated, those will not have formed a part of the MOU. And until there is an agreement on the placement or the treatment of those, they will have to continue. The information that we have, the agreement that we have says that we will continue to have those dialogues up until 31st of March 2023 to deal with the policy issues surrounding those benefits and allowances that have not yet been agreed. And there are some longer conversations that we are to have as well for other benefits and allowances that have not yet been agreed. This is the first phase of a 3-year program. So it's not the be all and end all, it doesn't end here. This is the first phase. There are anomalies. We have seen situations, for instance, where I'll use the example of a PA4 who is not at a PA5, but at a PA4, and we have to look at the job classification exercise in round 2 that is going to fix those, what we refer to as systemic issues in terms of classification. We are not finished yet. This is just the first phase, and this is the phase to take us from where we were into the new system. What has been the hamstrung for most of us is the quantum of the retro that is causing a lot of us serious problems, particularly when we look at the impact or the implications of taxation on that, particularly for those who are getting the 1.6 million and above. 1.6 million fixed car allowance, and those whose upkeep allowance is a significant portion of their income. When you know back that into salaries, when persons are moved from a lower tax bracket into a higher tax bracket, these are some of the conversations we're having with the TIU. For instance, somebody who never paid income tax before, that when they run the calculations, they are seeing this person paying a lot of taxes. And it's retroactive to April 1. How do we treat with those situations where it was never the intention to ensure to cause those persons to be paying all of their income back in some form of a taxable arrangement? So conversations continue, colleagues. It is not the end. This is just the first phase. We're effecting the payment by virtue of the agreements that we have signed, but we do recognize that there are anomalies, and we are prepared as your representatives to work them through to see how we can get them resolved to the satisfaction or to lessen the dissatisfaction of the persons who are to benefit. That's much.
Good evening, everyone. I think Anil has said a lot of what needs to be said, but just to assure members across the length and breadth of Jamaica that as unions, we have been doing everything possible to be able to ensure that this compensation review exercise is one that will benefit most, if not all, public servants. And it is not the easiest of exercises. So a lot of our members are not able to appreciate the difficulties involved. And so as a result, we have a lot of impatience building up, but we just ask for you to remain patient with the process. We have come to this point, having had discussions, direct discussions since March of this year with the Confederation of Trade Unions, but it actually began far before that, because the work of the consultants in bringing us to this point of being able to come up with recommended pay scales, pay levels, and a totally new way of dealing with compensation. The consultants had in fact been having sessions such as these, almost, in which the unions were involved in terms of the conduct of the exercise to ensure that there was fairness across the board in terms of how the exercise was conducted. So I think we are at this point, and I wouldn't want us to, because there is some level of discomfort amongst several persons, particularly our traveling officers, that we should believe that the issues cannot be resolved, or that we are not working to ensure that we get the best deal possible. In fact, it was because we were actually focusing on trying to bring some kind of resolution to the problems that our traveling officers faced while we signed so late in the day, because we're seeking to, correct those problems. With regard to some of the issues that have been raised in relation to anomalies or dissatisfaction that members may have in terms of where they have come out arising from the job evaluation exercise, this is where we move into phase 2, which is really going to dig deep now into the classification issues, because some of the issues that come to us make it clear that what is really the problem is the classification, and where people are claiming that there are anomalies. A lot of it is really because certainly from our standpoint, it does not appear that changes in jobs over the years, because jobs evolve, that these changes have not been accounted for in our job descriptions. And so all of this is something that we'll have to now come on board in the second phase of the exercise. So again, we crave your patience in getting to that point of being able to deal with those issues, because those issues cannot be dealt with around a bargaining table. It is really getting deep into it, looking at the job descriptions, making sure that they accurately reflect the job, and then moving to evaluate those jobs, and in that way being able to determine whether they are properly classified or not. It is a very difficult exercise. There are not many places in the world where you conduct an exercise like this that is looking at 10,000 persons, and in terms of jobs, you're looking at probably close to 1,000 different jobs. So it is an exercise of a magnitude that not just for Jamaica, but anywhere you go in the world, it is something that, is, I have had actually colleagues in trade unions elsewhere in the world who have said, that we have actually taken on a job that is really a difficult one, but we believe that this is the exercise that will carry our public servants to a level where we are going to be properly compensated, and that in terms of delivery of service and how we actually look at a job in the public sector, that will change, because we are now going to be seeing ourselves in a different light. And so, again, we ask that, you be patient with the process. And as we have been saying to members, if you identify anything that appears to be an anomaly, or if you are dissatisfied, you can report that directly in, or certainly through your union, so that we can make the proper representation for them to be dealt with. Because Minister has indicated that there are some stopgaps, so to speak, that will deal with things, but I am pretty sure anomalies may not, a lot of them may not be able to be taken up in that system. And so once you are able to identify that there is a problem, you report it in so that we can do the analysis and make the representation on your behalf. So we are at this point this evening because of the concerns that have been raised since Saturday, and we have tried to resolve the issue, and we are hoping that going forward, we will be able to delve even further so that the benefits can begin to accrue in the way that we know that it should be in the case of our public servants who are not just long serving, but many of whom are dedicated to the work that they're doing. And we know that, you have looked for a day when you will be properly recognized in terms of your pay, etc. And we believe that we have started on that road, and we just want you to remain patient so that we can complete the journey.
Very sobering words there, Mrs. Davis-White. Minister, do you want to wrap, or do you want to take some more questions?
Maybe we can take say 5 more questions.
Okay. A question here: what happens if the ministry does not submit the calculations in time for payment? That's a very...
Sorry, what will happen if the ministry does not submit it?
Yes,
The,
right.
the Ministry of Finance and Public Service, and by extension, the Accountant General, is very dependent on ministries to submit information. We can only pay on the information received from ministries. So we are working hard to encourage everybody to submit on time. I think that there's a common interest in having that done, so I don't think we have to have any undue worry about that. I think that certainly as far as the civil service is concerned, that information will come in. I believe will come in time.
Right. Question here: does payday December 20 still stand? It's related to that, Minister, so we could.
Yes, payday is December 20. Yes.
What is the story on duty concession?
As I've said before, the story on duty concession is that we have listened to the concerns that have been raised. We have dialogue with your representatives in the in public sector unions, and as a result of those conversations, those discussions, those consultations, and listening to members of the public sector, we have decided that the duty concession regime remains unchanged, and we continue to have discussions about how we can reform and make it better.
Thank you very much. When there are anomalies, to whom must we report them?
Well, I think the first thing to report would be to your HR manager, payroll officer, and they will have a duty to collate those instances of anomalies and get that information to the Ministry of Finance and Public Service. As Janine has just mentioned, and as Anil has just mentioned, presidents of the Confederation and Civil Service Association, respectively, they would have an interest to learn of anomalies that are not addressed. Right? So your first or a protocol, I would say, would be to your HR manager, payroll officer. And, you know, if you believe that those are not being addressed, then you have, you know, the opportunity to also discuss with your public sector union.
Two related questions. Will there be a reclassification exercise after this? And will there be another SERP? SERP was a special early retirement program.
No, on the latter, we won't have another SERP right now. You know, for those things to be effective, you cannot have them every couple of years, right? You have to have them, you know, once in a while. And that while hasn't passed yet. So we're not planning to have another SERP.
What about reclassification? That element has not been answered. Will there be a reclassification exercise after this?
There's as a part of phase 2, yes.
And Minister, if you want to wrap by reiterating any points.
Yes, so I want to first of all thank everyone. We have maintained an attendance of about 500 persons throughout the last, what has it been? Over 20 minutes, and persons
But
are waiting for some.
we stream to YouTube, so there's 1,000 on YouTube.
Oh, 1,000 on YouTube. Wow, sorry, 500 live on the Zoom platform, 1,000 on YouTube. I apologize for the background. I can't believe this is being streamed to YouTube with this background. I'm looking at Maria and saying, but look, this was very quickly arranged to make sure we could be responsive to your concerns. And I hope you see the spirit of openness with which we have had this conversation today in partnership with your representatives at the Civil Service Association and the Confederation of Trade Unions. And we will continue to work together to advance the public interest and advance your interest as dependable, loyal, and highly valued members of Jamaica Civil Service. As President Helene asked earlier, I ask for your patience and understanding in what is an extremely ambitious exercise, but one that once we get done will provide us with the confidence that we can together, working together, take on what may seem to be insurmountable tasks and insurmountable complex structural problems, and through application of analysis, through getting expert advice, through quantitative and technological approaches, and through dialogue and consultation, we can take on the toughest challenges, of which there are many, and take them on successfully and implement rounds of reform that address those challenges. I ask that you approach this with continue to approach this with a positive and optimistic outlook, and when don't be afraid to share when December 20th comes. For a lot of people, it's going to be a significant amount. Sometimes persons who are in receipt of significant amounts want to remain quiet, and the voices of those who may be displeased are the only voices that are heard. Don't be afraid to let people know how this has turned out for you. The amounts are likely to be significant in relation to one's current compensation coming at one time. So much so that the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service has arranged for a special session on Wednesday on providing a session where a number of financial institutions will be present. And that session is geared towards ensuring that members of the civil service, the public sector service more generally, have access to a proper financial advice in the use of these proceeds. Though they're coming at this time that coincides with the Christmas period, and we can't tell you what to do with your money, but we can have a hope that it's not necessarily taken up in festive activities, but can be used for longer term objectives that enhance your lives and the lives of your family. We're working hard for you, taking on difficult challenges, and we continue to rely on your faith and on your confidence, and we will ensure that your interests are adequately addressed and represented. Thank you very much for attending today, and we will have other fora such as this, going forward. Good night.